In a world where loyalty is measured by blood spilled, one man's certainty becomes another's salvation. For 15 years, Duke Evander of Blackmoor has served as the king's shadow, his executioner, his unwavering blade. When whispers of a village herbal healer with dangerous claims reach the palace, Evander receives his orders. Silence her, permanently. Another name to add to his ledger of the dead. But fate has a way of unraveling even the most tightly wound convictions. Under the cover of thunderous night, as lightning illuminates the humble cottage, Evander confronts the woman he's been sent to kill. Their struggle reveals what should have remained hidden, a medallion, ancient and royal, bearing a secret mark known only to the closest servants of the true crown. A medallion that belongs around the neck of only one person, Princess Lysandra, the lost child of the massacred royal family. The executioner now faces an impossible choice. The woman before him, this simple healer with hands that mend rather than destroy, could be the rightful ruler of the very kingdom he's sworn to protect. Every belief he's held, every order he's followed, every life he's taken in the name of loyalty. Was it all built on royal lies? As pursuers close in and long-buried truths claw their way to the surface, Evander and Lyra find themselves bound by destiny, and perhaps something more dangerous still, a growing affection that defies the chasm between their worlds. In a realm where truth is the most valuable currency and the most dangerous weapon, their journey will ignite a revolution. Blood will be shed, loyalties tested, hearts transformed. For when a kingdom's fate hangs by the thread of a forgotten medallion, even the most hardened executioner may find himself becoming something unprecedented, a protector, a believer, perhaps even a lover. Some secrets are meant to remain buried, others are destined to rise and reclaim their rightful place. This is not just a story of lost royalty found, it's a tale of redemption, of second chances, of discovering that sometimes the greatest act of loyalty is betrayal of everything you thought you stood for. If this story has captured your imagination, don't let it fade away like forgotten royalty. Subscribe to our channel to ensure you never miss the next chapter in our epic tales of redemption, romance, and revolution. Your support through likes and comments fuels the creation of these immersive worlds. Share this journey with others who appreciate stories where duty clashes with destiny, and save it to your library for those moments when you need to escape into a realm where courage changes fate. Remember, every great story deserves to be told, but the greatest stories deserve to be shared. Join our community of storytellers and dreamers today. The throne room of Valoria stood silent as a tomb, despite the 20 guards lining its walls and the handful of courtiers hovering at a respectful distance. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting pools of colored light across the marble floor, red as blood, blue as loyalty, gold as power. At the center of this kaleidoscope stood Duke Evander of Blackmoor, his posture military straight, his face a carefully crafted mask of neutrality. King Victorian sat upon the gilded throne, his crown catching the light. Despite his 60 years, there was nothing frail about him. His shoulders remained broad, his gaze penetrating beneath heavy brows. The only hint of age lay in the silver threaded through his dark beard and the deep lines etched around eyes that had witnessed, ordered, and concealed countless atrocities. "A village herbalist," Victorian said, his voice deceptively casual, "in the Vale of Westbrook." Evander gave a single nod. He did not ask for clarification. After 15 years as the king's special executor, he understood that brevity was expected. "She possesses something," the king continued, leaning forward slightly, the first sign of the tension brewing beneath his regal exterior, "and speaks of things she should not know." From the shadows beside the throne, a skeletal figure emerged. Councillor Magnus, the king's closest advisor, moved with the silent grace of a spider, his elaborate robes of midnight blue whispering against the stone floor. His face was a study in angles, sharp cheekbones, pointed chin, and eyes so pale they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "This particular situation requires delicacy," Magnus said, his voice smooth as oil on water. "The woman appears harmless, a simple healer tending to peasants and their ailments. Yet she possesses an object allegedly connected to the old dynasty, and some of the villagers have begun to listen to her tales. Evander remained expressionless, though his mind worked quickly. Items from the fallen house of Alaric were rare. Most had been destroyed in the Purge 15 years ago. The king's knuckles whitened against the armrests of his throne. We cannot allow such sparks to catch flame. The stability of the realm is paramount, Evander finished, the familiar justification falling from his lips automatically. I understand, Your Majesty. Magnus glided closer, extending a sealed parchment. Her name is Lyra, 22 years of age, no family remaining, which is convenient. Evander accepted the document, careful not to let his fingers touch the counselors. Something about Magnus had always set his instincts on edge, like the air before a lightning strike. The same as always, Duke Evander, the king said, his voice dropping to nearly a whisper. No witnesses, no traces. The woman and her dangerous relic simply disappear. Evander bowed, hand over heart. As you command, so shall it be done. As he turned to leave, Magnus called after him. This one is particularly dangerous, Duke Evander. She appears to have convinced some of the simpler folk of her fantasies. Remember, a spark can ignite an entire forest. Evander met the counselor's pale gaze directly. In 15 years of service to the crown, I have never failed in my duty. I will not start now. The heavy doors of the throne room closed behind him, with the finality of a tomb being sealed. Night had fallen by the time Evander returned to his private chambers in the eastern wing of the palace. Unlike the ostentatious quarters of other nobles, his rooms were Spartan, a soldier's quarters dressed in duke's clothing. The only luxury he permitted himself was a balcony overlooking the royal gardens and, beyond them, the sprawling capital city. On his oak desk lay the open dispatch from the king. Lyra's information was sparse. Female, 22, orphaned, trained in herbal medicine, resided in Westbrook for most of her life. No known associates beyond the villagers she treated. No known travel outside the valley. By all accounts, an unremarkable life, until she had begun speaking of the old dynasty and displaying something that drew too much attention. Evander moved to a chest at the foot of his bed, unlocking it with a key kept on a chain around his neck. Inside lay the tools of his true profession, slender daggers designed to slip between ribs, vials of colorless poisons, garments of commoners and merchants for disguise, and a purse of untraced gold coins. He selected his equipment methodically, each item chosen for a purpose, each purpose aligned to his mission. As he worked, a memory surfaced unbidden. His father, Commander Aldrich of the Royal Guard, standing tall at the coronation of King Victorian. Evander had been just 17, still reeling from the news of the rebellion that had overthrown the tyrannical House of Alaric. His father's face had been unreadable that day, but his words afterward remained etched in Evander's memory. "Remember, son," Aldrich had said, his voice low as they watched the celebrations from afar. "Loyalty to the realm comes before loyalty to any man." A cryptic statement that had puzzled young Evander. The realm and its ruler were one and the same, weren't they? But his father had died only months later, branded a secret sympathizer to the old regime, and executed for treason, a harsh lesson in the new order under King Victorian. Evander closed the chest, locking away both his tools and his memories. Such reflections served no purpose. He was the king's executor, the shadow that fell upon threats to the realm's stability. Personal feelings had no place in his duty. By midnight, he had transformed himself. Gone were the fine clothes of a duke, in their place the weathered garb of a merchant. His regal posture had softened into the slight stoop of a man who spent hours on horseback. Only his eyes remained unchanged, sharp, observant, and coldly focused. Dawn broke with thin fingers of light as Evander rode through the palace's service gates. No grand procession for the Duke of Blackmore. His departures, like his returns, went deliberately unnoticed. The cobblestone streets gradually gave way to packed dirt roads, then to winding pathways as he left the capital behind. The journey to Westbrook would take 3 days at a steady pace. Alone with his thoughts on the road, Evander found himself contemplating his mission with unusual scrutiny. 15 years of service, dozens of threats neutralized, all for the stability of a realm that had prospered under Victorian's firm hand. Or so the official record stated. Yet in recent years, Evander had witnessed troubling signs in his travels. Villagers growing thinner while tax collectors grew fatter, provincial nobles flaunting wealth while their people struggled, veterans of the king's expansionist campaigns begging in streets. Small inconsistencies that, taken together, formed a discordant note in the triumphant melody of Vitorian's reign. He pushed such thoughts aside. His task was not to question, but to execute, in every sense of the word. By midday of the third day, he reached the crest of a hill overlooking the Vale of Westbrook. The village below seemed peaceful, nestled between rolling hills and a winding river. Smoke curled from chimneys, and distant figures moved between timber and stone buildings. An ordinary place harboring what the king considered an extraordinary threat. Evander adjusted his pack and checked the concealed daggers at his belt and boot. His hand moved unconsciously to another hidden pocket, where a tiny vial contained a tasteless, odorless poison, quick, painless, and untraceable. A mercy he offered to those whose deaths he deemed obligatory, but not deserved of suffering. "More one mission," he murmured to his horse, patting its neck. "Just one more." The words rang hollow even to his own ears. There would always be another threat, another mission, another death required for the realm's stability. Such was the path he had chosen, or perhaps the path that had chosen him after his father's execution had left him vulnerable and alone, a young nobleman rescued from association with treason only by pledging absolute loyalty to the new regime. Evander urged his horse forward, descending toward Westbrook. His practiced eye noted defensive positions, escape routes, and gathering places where villagers would congregate. By nightfall, he would be established in their midst, an injured merchant seeking a healer's aid, drawn by tales of a skilled herbalist named Lyra. 3 days to locate and observe, 1 day to confirm the threat, 1 night to eliminate it, a simple formula that had served him for 15 years. Yet as he approached the village, something unusual stirred within him, a faint disquiet like the first tremor before an avalanche. Evander dismissed it, as he had all such feelings over the years. Personal sentiment was a luxury he had surrendered long ago when he became the king's shadow. The Duke of Blackmore disappeared with each hoofbeat down the hill. By the time he reached the village square, only a weary merchant with a bandaged arm remained, a stranger seeking help, harmless and forgettable, or so he needed them to believe. The village square buzzed with afternoon activity, traders haggling, children playing, women drawing water from the central well. Evander dismounted stiffly, playing up his injured arm, allowing his gaze to wander naturally across the scene while cataloguing every detail. "Looking for someone, traveler?" asked an older man loading a cart with firewood. Evander adopted the accent of the northern provinces. "I seek the healer. My arm's been troubling me since a fall 3 days past." The man nodded toward a modest cottage near the edge of the square. Outside, a young woman knelt in a garden of medicinal herbs, her hands gently tending the plants while a small child watched beside her. Her hair, the rich brown of fertile earth, was tied back simply, and her dress, though humble, was neat and well kept. "That's Lyra," the man said. "Best healer in the valley. Has a way with plants like they speak to her directly." He lowered his voice. "Some say she has special blood, if you catch my meaning, but best not mention such things. The king's men have ears everywhere these days." Evander thanked him and approached the cottage, studying the woman who had earned the king's deadly attention. As he drew closer, she looked up from her work, and for a brief, disorienting moment, Evander felt a strange recognition, though he was certain they had never met. A small girl sat beside Lyra, her arm wrapped in a fresh bandage. The child smiled up at the healer. "You have hands like a queen, Lyra. That's why you can fix everyone." Lyra laughed, the sound genuine and warm. "I'm just a herbalist, little one, nothing more." She turned as Evander's shadow fell across her garden, rising gracefully to her feet. Her eyes, he noted with professional detachment, were unusual, a deep violet blue rarely seen in Valoria, a memorable feature he'd need to document in his report. "You look in need of assistance, traveler," she said, her voice neither timid nor bold, but measured and kind. Evander presented his false injury, the practiced lies flowing easily. Yet as Lyra gestured him inside her cottage to examine his wound, The strange disquiet returned stronger than before. 15 years. Dozens of missions. Why should this one feel different? He crossed the threshold into Lyra's simple home, every sense alert despite his outward appearance of pain and weariness. The king's executor had arrived at his destination. The hunt had begun. The interior of Lyra's cottage was modest, but meticulously organized. Dried herbs hung from the ceiling beams, their fragrance, earthy and sweet, filling the air. Shelves lined the walls, carrying neatly labeled jars of powders, tinctures and salves. A small hearth provided warmth and light, casting dancing shadows across the wooden floor. Evander took note of everything, as Lyra gestured for him to sit at a simple table. 2 exits, the front door and a smaller one leading presumably to a back garden. 1 window large enough for a swift escape if necessary. No signs of weapons, though several of the herbs he recognized could be deadly if properly prepared. "Your arm troubles you?" Lyra asked, washing her hands in a basin of water. "A fall from my horse 3 days past," Evander replied, maintaining his northern accent. "The pain worsens at night." She approached, and he instinctively tensed as she reached for his injured arm. Her touch was gentle but confident as she unwrapped the false bandage he'd applied. "Strange," she murmured, inspecting the perfectly healthy skin beneath. "I see no wound here." Their eyes met, and something flickered in her gaze, not fear but wariness. In that moment, Evander realized his first mistake. Lyra was more observant than he'd anticipated. "The pain comes from within," he improvised. "The skin healed, but something feels broken underneath." She held his gaze a moment longer, then nodded slowly. "I've seen such injuries before. The body can hide its hurts." As she turned to retrieve herbs from her shelf, Evander reassessed her. Most village healers were elderly women or men with limited knowledge passed down through generations. Lyra moved with the precision of someone formally trained, her diagnoses clinical rather than superstitious. "You've studied healing arts beyond this village," he observed, deliberately softening his voice to appear unthreatening. "Books, mostly," she replied, crushing leaves in a mortar. "And travelers bring knowledge from distant places. The world is larger than Westbrook, after all." A careful answer, revealing nothing of consequence. "You have quite a reputation," he continued. "The man in the square spoke highly of your skills. People are kind." He mentioned other things as well, about special blood. Her hand stilled momentarily, the only indication that his words had struck a nerve. "Village gossip," she said lightly, but her shoulders had tensed. "People love their stories, especially about orphans. Without known parentage, they're free to imagine grand origins for me." Evander nodded, filing away her reaction. "And what do you imagine about your origins?" Lyra turned to face him, a poultice in her hands. Her expression had closed like a fortress gate. "I know what I am, traveler, a healer. Nothing more, nothing less." The defiance in her tone carried a warning. This line of questioning was unwelcome. Evander allowed the subject to drop, feigning a grimace as she applied the poultice to his injury. Her fingers worked with practiced efficiency, wrapping his arm with fresh bandages. "Leave this on until morning," she instructed. "It will draw out the hidden pain." He thanked her, offering payment which she accepted without hesitation. Another detail that challenged his expectations. In his experience, those harboring secrets or rebellious intentions often refused money from strangers, fearful of appearing beholden. As he rose to leave, a small child, perhaps 8 years old, burst through the door, clutching a feverish infant. "Lyra, my brother's burning up," the girl cried, tears streaming down her dirt-smudged face. Without hesitation, Lyra took the wailing infant, pressing her lips to his forehead to gauge his temperature. "How long has he been like this?" "Since midday," the girl sobbed. "Ma sent me to fetch you, but no time to waste," Lyra interrupted, already gathering supplies into a worn leather satchel. She glanced at Evander. "I must go." Her dismissal was clear, but Evander saw an opportunity. "I could help carry your supplies to repay your kindness." She hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Very well." Outside, the afternoon had given way to early evening, the sky painted in deepening blues. Evander followed Lyra and the girl through winding paths between cottages, noting how villagers acknowledged the healer with respectful nods or relieved smiles. They reached a small dilapidated hut at the village's edge. Inside, a harried woman bent over a crude cradle, while 3 other children huddled in a corner. What followed was a masterclass in emergency care. Lyra transformed before Evander's eyes, her movements swift and decisive, her instructions clear and firm. She prepared cool compresses, mixed a syrup for the fever, and demonstrated breathing techniques to the terrified mother. Hours passed as they fought for the infant's life. Evander found himself pressed into service, boiling water, grinding herbs, and holding the child while Lyra administered treatments. The assassin's hands, trained to end lives with surgical precision, now worked to preserve one. Near midnight, the crisis passed. The baby's fever broke, his pitiful cries strengthening into healthier wails. Relief washed over the mother's face as she took her child back, tears streaming unchecked. "May the old gods anew bless you, Lyra," she whispered. "You're a miracle in human form." "Just knowledge and patience," Lyra replied, but her exhaustion was evident in the slump of her shoulders. Outside, the night air had turned cold. A storm approached from the west, distant lightning illuminating mountains on the horizon. Evander walked beside Lyra in silence, carrying her depleted supplies. "You were helpful in there," she said finally. "You have some experience with healing." "Field medicine," he replied, the partial truth easier than a complete lie. As a soldier, he had indeed learned to treat wounds, knowledge equally valuable for ensuring targets survived for questioning. "The mother called on the old gods," he observed carefully. "Unusual with the king's new temples in every village." Lyra shrugged. "Old habits persist in remote places. The king's priests rarely venture this far from the capital." They reached her cottage as the first raindrops began to fall. Thunder rumbled closer now, promising a violent storm. Lyra looked up at the churning clouds. "You shouldn't travel in this weather. There's a small inn near the square." Evander nodded his thanks, but made no move to leave. "You saved that child's life tonight." "I did what anyone with knowledge would do." "No," he said, studying her with newfound curiosity. "Not anyone." For the first time, Lyra smiled directly at him, a genuine expression that transformed her face from merely pretty to strikingly beautiful. "Perhaps you're right. Good night, traveler." "Evander," he said, the half-truth slipping out before he could reconsider. "My name is Evander." "Rest well, Evander," she replied, disappearing into her cottage. Instead of heading to the inn, Evander circled back, positioning himself near a large oak tree with clear sightlines to Lyra's home. The storm intensified, rain soaking through his clothes, but he remained motionless, watching. Through her window he could see Lyra moving about, preparing for sleep. She changed her dress behind a screen, emerging in a simple nightgown. Then she did something unexpected. Looking around as if to ensure her privacy, she reached beneath her pillow and withdrew a small object that gleamed dully in the candlelight. Evander strained to see. A necklace or pendant of some kind, which she clutched in both hands, eyes closed as if in prayer. When she opened her eyes, she pressed the object to her lips before concealing it once more beneath her pillow. The relic, he thought. It had to be. Small enough to hide, precious enough to cherish in private. Whatever had drawn the king's lethal attention was now within his reach. Lightning cracked overhead, followed immediately by deafening thunder. Evander made his decision. The storm would cover any sounds. The village would be asleep. He would finish his mission tonight, retrieve the object, eliminate the threat, and be miles away by dawn. He waited until Lyra's candle had been extinguished for over an hour. Then, moving like a shadow, he approached the cottage. The lock was simple. His picks made short work of it. The door swung open silently on well-maintained hinges. Inside, the cottage was dark, save for the occasional flash of lightning through the window. Evander moved with practiced stealth, avoiding the few pieces of furniture from memory. He could hear Lyra's steady breathing from the small bed in the corner. He approached slowly, one hand ready with a cloth soaked in a fast-acting sedative. He would use the poison only if necessary. A quiet disappearance was preferable to an obvious murder. Another flash of lightning illuminated the room, confirming Lyra's sleeping form. 3 more steps and he stood beside her bed. She slept peacefully, one hand curled near her face, dark hair spread across the pillow. For a fleeting moment, Evander felt an unfamiliar hesitation. Focus on the mission, he reminded himself. She's a threat to the realm's stability. He reached carefully beneath her pillow, fingers searching for the mysterious object. Lyra stirred slightly and he froze. Another attempt, and his fingers brushed against something metallic. Carefully, he began to withdraw it. Lightning flashed again, and Lyra's eyes snapped open. For one suspended moment, they stared at each other, her violet blue eyes widening in recognition and fear. Then she exploded into action, rolling away from his grasp and seizing a nearby jar, which she hurled at his head. Evander dodged, abandoning stealth. "Stop, I don't want to hurt you." "Liar," she cried, backing away. "Thief, help." Her shouts would be lost in the storm, but Evander knew he needed to regain control of the situation. He lunged forward, attempting to restrain her, but Lyra proved surprisingly agile. She dodged his grasp, throwing anything she could reach: jars, books, a stool. In the chaotic struggle, her nightgown tore at the collar. A flash of lightning revealed something hanging from a chain around her neck. What he had felt beneath the pillow was merely the end of this chain. Evander grabbed for it, catching the pendant itself. Lyra gasped in pain as the chain dug into her neck, but she didn't release it. They struggled face to face, both gripping the mysterious object. "Let go!" she demanded, her eyes fierce despite her fear. "I can't," he replied, his mission clear despite his growing confusion. Another violent flash of lightning illuminated the pendant between their hands. Evander's breath caught in his throat. A medallion of pure gold, crafted with exquisite detail. A dragon intertwined with a rose, a blood-red ruby set at its center. But it was the tiny markings around the edge that froze Evander's blood. Markings he had seen only once before, as a boy, when his father had shown him the royal seal of the House of Alaric. This seal contains secret marks that only the true heirs and the most loyal servants know, his father had explained. It cannot be replicated, cannot be forged. It is the ultimate proof of royal blood. The medallion slipped from Evander's suddenly nerveless fingers, hanging once more around Lyra's neck. She backed away, clutching it protectively, watching him with the wariness of a cornered animal. "Where did you get that?" he whispered, his disguise forgotten, his mission unraveling. "It's mine," she said fiercely, "my only inheritance. Please don't take it." Evander stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. The unusual violet blue eyes, the natural grace and dignity, the innate authority she commanded even while healing the poorest villagers. "You don't know what it is, do you?" he asked, his voice hollow. "A memento of my true family," she replied, confusion mixing with her fear. Nothing more. Evander stepped back, his mind reeling. If the medallion was genuine, and he was certain it was, then everything changed. The woman before him was not a random threat to be eliminated. She was Princess Lysandra of Valoria, the lost daughter of King Alaric and Queen Alara, the rightful heir to the very throne he had served for 15 years, and he had been sent to kill her. The storm raged outside Lyra's cottage, rain lashing against the windows with the fury of 1,000 drums. Inside, by the flickering light of a single lantern, Evander and Lyra sat across from each other at the wooden table. The distance between them was small, but the chasm of mistrust that had opened earlier still yawned wide. Evander's jaw tightened as he studied the young woman before him, no longer just a target, no longer a rumor to be snuffed out. She was flesh and blood, a living echo of a past he had been ordered to erase. "The king sent me to silence you," he admitted, voice low, almost gravelly with the weight of confession. Lyra clutched the medallion against her chest, as if it alone could shield her. Her hair, still damp from the earlier scuffle, clung to her temples. She looked at him, eyes gleaming like polished amethyst under the lantern's glow. "Then why am I still alive?" she asked, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hands. Evander's gaze shifted briefly to the medallion, its golden surface catching the light. "Because that," he said, nodding toward the artifact, "changes everything. It's not just jewelry, it's proof. proof of your bloodline." Lyra shook her head in disbelief, her fingers tightening around the pendant. "This is madness," she whispered. "I'm just a herbalist, daughter of peasants. I know no kings, no courts." Evander leaned forward, elbows resting on the scarred wood of the table. "Did your parents, your adoptive parents, ever tell you anything? Anything strange about the night they found you?" Lyra opened her mouth to reply, but closed it again, uncertainty flickering across her face. Then, slowly, like peeling away an old bandage, she spoke. "There were whispers," she said. "When I was little, I would have dreams, memories maybe. A vast room with red curtains, a woman singing a lullaby, and screams, terrible screams." Her voice broke slightly at the last word, and she blinked rapidly, as if holding back tears. Evander absorbed her words, his mind racing. Red curtains. The royal nursery had been famously draped in crimson silk. The lullaby, Queen Ilara's favorite song, was said to have been sung to her daughter each night, and the screams, the night the capital burned, the night House Alaric fell. "What you're remembering," he said carefully, "isn't a dream. It's a memory of the palace, of the night your family was destroyed." Lyra shook her head again, more forcefully this time. No, that can't be. Tomas and Mira, my parents, they would have told me. Or maybe they were sworn to protect you, to keep your identity hidden until the time was right." A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the howl of the storm outside. Finally, Lyra whispered, "So what happens now? Do you kill me anyway?" Evander rose from his chair, his decision made with the clarity of a man who had crossed a line he could never return from. "I'm going to find the truth," he said. "I owe you that much. I owe the kingdom that much." He moved to the door, pulling his cloak tight against the rain. "Stay hidden," he warned. "Trust no one, especially not anyone who claims to serve the king." Without another word, he vanished into the storm. The forest surrounding Westbrook was a labyrinth of ancient oaks and whispering pines, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky. At dawn, under a canopy of mist and dripping leaves, Evander knelt beside a makeshift perch of stones and loosed a raven into the grey morning. Tied to its leg was a tiny scroll, written in a code only the most trusted members of the old regime would recognize. "The rose survived the winter. Confirm the gardener's last harvest." The message was addressed to Lord Thorn, a name known to few but whispered in reverence among those loyal to House Alaric. Evander watched the bird disappear into the thickening clouds, a silent prayer on his lips. If Thorn still lived, if he still remembered his oath, perhaps there was hope. But hope, Evander knew, was a dangerous thing. Miles away, deep within the soaring spires of the royal palace, the raven reached its destination. But not to Lord Thorn. Instead, the creature was intercepted by skeletal fingers wrapped in jeweled rings, those of Magnus, the king's most trusted advisor and the true architect behind the fall of House Alaric. Magnus read the message once, his face twisting into a mask of fury and fear. "The Duke has become a problem," he hissed to the shadowy figure standing at his side. A man clad in black armor, his face hidden behind a helm shaped like a crow's beak. "Send the Dark Guard," Magnus ordered. "Bring me the girl, and silence Evander." The man in black bowed once, then disappeared like smoke. Magnus turned back to the window, gazing out at the storm-soaked city. "We buried the truth once," he murmured. "We will bury it again." Back at the cottage, Lyra sat before the hearth, staring into the flames. The medallion felt heavy around her neck, a burden rather than a blessing. Every instinct told her to run, to vanish into the wilds and leave this madness behind. But somewhere deep inside, a seed had been planted, a stubborn, defiant seed of possibility. If what Evander said was true, if she was who he claimed, then maybe she had a duty greater than her own fear. A memory surfaced then, unbidden, a feverish night years ago, when her mother, Mira, had clutched her hand and whispered words she hadn't understood until now. "When the time comes, you must be brave, my little Rose. You must be ready to fight for who you are." The time had come. Lyra rose, gathering what little she had, a satchel of herbs, a knife, a woolen cloak. She hid the medallion beneath her tunic, close to her heart. Then, without looking back, she stepped into the storm. The forest was a different world in daylight, dripping and gleaming with rainwater. Every shadow seemed alive, every rustle a potential threat. But Lyra moved swiftly, following narrow, hidden trails only the locals knew. She had no clear destination, only the instinct that staying put meant death. Hours later, as the sun struggled to pierce the overcast sky, Lyra heard the distant beat of hooves. Panic surged through her. She ducked into a dense thicket, pressing herself low to the ground. Through the leaves she saw them, riders clad in black, their armor dull and menacing, their standards bearing the sigil of a crow devouring a rose. The Dark Guard. They swept through the forest like a scythe through wheat, searching, sniffing, hunting. One of them dismounted, crouching to study the muddy ground. Tracks. Lyra's tracks. The soldier barked an order, and half the group peeled away, following her trail. Heart hammering, Lyra turned and fled deeper into the woods. Branches tore at her skin, mud sucked at her boots, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Behind her, she heard the baying of hunting dogs. The storm might have passed, but her personal tempest was just beginning. Meanwhile, at a crumbling tower on the kingdom's eastern border, Evander waited. The rendezvous point was ancient, an old watchtower from before the wars, now half swallowed by ivy and decay. It had served in ages past as a secret meeting place for those who still remembered the old ways. He didn't wait long. From the mist emerged a man, his hair silvered with age but his back still straight as a blade. Lord Thorn. "You took your time," Thorn said by way of greeting. Evander knelt briefly in respect. "I found her," he said without preamble. "The lost princess." Thorn's eyes sharpened. "Alive? And carrying the medallion." Thorn let out a breath that sounded almost like a sob. "The bloodline endures," he murmured. "Praise the stars." "But the king's men know," Evander warned. "Magnus intercepted my message." Thorn's expression darkened. "Then we have little time. Where is she?" "In the forest, running for her life." Thorn placed a heavy hand on Evander's shoulder. "Then you must find her, Duke. Find her and protect her with your life. The kingdom's future depends on it." Evander nodded, a new resolve hardening in his chest. He had failed his conscience for 15 years. He would not fail her. As night fell once more over the kingdom, Lyra stumbled into a clearing, only to find herself face to face with a wall of armored riders, the Dark Guard. Their leader dismounted, removing his crow-shaped helm to reveal a cruel, scarred face. "So," he sneered, drawing a black-bladed sword. The little Rose thought she could run. Lyra backed away, clutching the hidden medallion. The leader advanced, blade gleaming. Time to finish what should have been finished years ago. Just as he raised his sword, a flash of steel intercepted it. Evander, riding hard out of the forest, sword drawn. Their blades clashed with a sound like thunder. "Run, Lyra!" Evander roared. But Lyra stood frozen, torn between terror and awe. For the first time in her life, someone was fighting for her. And deep inside, a long-buried truth unfurled its wings. She was not just a healer. She was not just an orphan. She was Lysandra of Valoria, and her story was only beginning. Night had fallen thick and heavy around Lyra's cottage. The rain had ceased, leaving the earth damp and the air pungent with the scent of wet leaves and smoke. The fire in the hearth sputtered low, casting a soft glow across the worn wooden floors. Evander burst through the door, his cloak soaked, his eyes hard with urgency. "We have to leave now," he said, his voice low but insistent. Lyra stood from her chair, startled by the sudden ferocity in him. "What is happening?" she asked, clutching the edge of the table. "We are no longer safe here," Evander replied, pulling a saddlebag onto the table and stuffing it with whatever provisions he could find. "The king knows you are alive, others will come worse than me." Lyra's heart clenched. She looked around the room, her home, the place where she had healed the sick, comforted the dying, loved and been loved. She could not simply abandon it. "I cannot leave my people," she protested fiercely. "My patients need me." Evander paused, hands clenched around the bag. His eyes softened slightly. "If you stay, there will be no one left to help them," he said quietly. "The king will send assassins, hunters. Worse things than you can imagine. They will burn this village to the ground to erase you." From the dark forest beyond the window came a low, haunting sound, the distant howl of wolves, not ordinary wolves, trained hunters, the Dark Guard. Evander stiffened immediately. He moved to the door, peering out into the night. "They are here," he said grimly. There was no more time for argument. He grabbed Lyra's hand, pulling her toward the stables. Outside, the world was awash of shadows and moonlight. The trees loomed like silent sentinels, watching the desperate flight unfold. They mounted Evander's horse, and with a swift, sharp command, he kicked the beast into a gallop. They plunged into the darkness of the forest, the pounding of hooves muffled by the wet ground, the howls growing louder behind them. Lyra clung to him, her mind racing faster than the horse. Could this truly be her fate? A fugitive hunted across the land she had once called home. She swallowed her fear, focusing on survival. Ahead, the forest thickened, branches slashing at them like reaching hands. Evander guided the horse with expert skill, weaving through the trees at breakneck speed. Suddenly, Lyra tugged at his arm. "There," she cried, pointing to a cluster of bushes heavy with dark berries. What Evander shouted over the wind. "Those berries, maskwort, they can hide our scent from the wolves." Without hesitation, Evander pulled the horse to a halt. He dismounted, gathering handfuls of the berries, crushing them between his fingers and smearing the juices across their cloaks and the horse's flanks. He looked at her in amazement. "Where did you learn that?" he asked. Lyra shook her head, confused. "I don't know," she admitted. "I just knew." Evander studied her for a moment, then nodded grimly, mounting again and urging the horse onward. Behind them, the howls grew more confused, uncertain. The berries were working. They rode hard through the night until the forest began to thin, the first pale light of dawn staining the horizon. Exhausted and soaked to the bone, they finally stopped in a small hollow, shielded by ancient oaks. "Here," Evander said, dismounting. "We rest briefly." He led the horse into the trees, tying it where it could graze unnoticed. Lyra sank to the ground, trembling from exhaustion, more than cold. Evander knelt by her, his gaze protective, scanning the forest for threats. "Sleep," he said softly. "I'll keep watch." Lyra hesitated, but her body betrayed her. She curled into herself, wrapped in the damp cloak, and drifted into a restless sleep. Evander sat beside her, sword across his knees. As the sun rose, he studied her face, illuminated by the gentle golden light. There was something hauntingly familiar about her features, the high cheekbones, the determined line of her jaw, the noble tilt of her head. She looked like the paintings he had once seen in the grand hall of the old palace. Portraits of Queen Alara in her youth. Evander's mind churned with questions and doubts. Had he been serving justice all these years, or had he been serving a lie? Lyra stirred, waking with a gasp, eyes wide and unfocused. She sat up, breathing hard, sweat beading on her forehead. Evander was at her side instantly, hand on her shoulder. "It's all right," he said gently. "You are safe." "I saw it," she whispered, voice trembling. The palace marble corridors. A woman with golden hair singing to me. She handed me to another woman, said to take me far away, to keep me safe. Tears filled her eyes. There were screams everywhere. Evander felt a pang of sorrow deep in his chest. "Your mother saved your life that night," he said quietly. Lyra looked at him, her gaze fierce through the tears. "I have to know more," she said. "I need to know who I am. And I will help you," he promised. They broke camp shortly after, moving swiftly through the forest. By mid-morning, they reached their destination, a crumbling monastery hidden among the hills, a place forgotten by time. The stone walls were covered in ivy, the great wooden doors weathered and cracked. Evander dismounted, helping Lyra to the ground. Together they approached. Evander knocked sharply, the sound echoing through the silent courtyard. After a long moment, the door creaked open, revealing an elderly man in simple robes. His hair was thin and white, but his eyes were sharp, full of life. "Brother Cedric," Evander said, inclining his head. Brother Cedric peered at him, then his gaze fell on Lyra. He paled, clutching the doorframe for support. "By all the gods," he whispered, voice trembling. "You recognize her?" Evander said quietly. Cedric stepped forward, reaching out with a trembling hand. "How could I not?" he murmured. "I baptized Princess Lysandra with these very hands." Lyra touched the medallion around her neck, unconsciously seeking comfort. Brother Cedric's eyes filled with tears as he saw the seal, the royal crest, the dragon, and the rose. He turned to Evander. How did the son of Commander Aldrich come to protect the true heir? Evander blinked, stunned. You knew my father. Cedric smiled sadly. A good man, he said. One of the few who remained loyal to the end. He gave his life trying to save what little hope remained. Confusion warred within Evander. All his life he had believed his father. His death had been a necessary sacrifice in the chaos of the rebellion. Now doubt gnawed at him. Cedric ushered them inside, bolting the heavy doors behind them. The interior of the monastery was cool and shadowy, lit by shafts of sunlight filtering through cracked stained glass. Brother Cedric led them to a small chamber where they could speak privately. Lyra told him everything she remembered, every fragmented dream, every half-forgotten whisper. Cedric listened patiently, his hands folded before him. When she finished, he bowed his head in prayer before speaking. You are Lysandra Alaric, daughter of King Alaric and Queen Ilara, rightful heir to the throne of Valoria. Your existence was hidden to protect you from Magnus and the usurpers. Your survival is the kingdom's last hope. Lyra sat back numb with the weight of it. I don't know how to be a princess, she said in a small voice. You have time to learn, Cedric said kindly, but we must move carefully. Many would kill to keep you from claiming your birthright. Evander stood silent, his mind racing. Could he protect her against the forces gathering against them? Would he be enough? Outside the monastery, the wind shifted, carrying with it the distant sound of hooves. The Dark Guard had not given up. They had merely circled ahead. Lyra felt the change in the air, a shiver running down her spine. The question was no longer whether she would fight. It was whether she could survive. And as the walls of the monastery trembled under the first blows of a battering ram, one terrible question hung in the air. Would the princess rise to reclaim her destiny before it was too late? The library of the ancient monastery smelled of parchment and time. Flickering candles lined the massive stone walls, their flames casting long shadows across the dusty tomes and brittle scrolls. In the center of the room stood Brother Cedric, a bundle of yellowed documents spread out before him on an oak table warped by centuries of use. Evander and Lyra stood across from him, their faces drawn tight with exhaustion and anticipation. Your father suspected Duke Vittorian long before the coup. Brother Cedric began, his voice heavy with sorrow. Months before the palace fell, Commander Aldrich sensed treachery brewing in the court. He pointed to a faded map of the old royal palace, intricate and sprawling. On the night of the fires, he said softly, while the rest of the kingdom believed the royal family was being slaughtered, Aldrich was orchestrating a desperate rescue. He personally commanded the royal nanny to flee with you, the only surviving heir. Evander's face darkened, a storm of emotions passing through him. I grew up believing my father was a traitor, he said through clenched teeth. Brother Cedric shook his head solemnly. He died a hero, Evander. He gave his life to preserve the last hope of Valoria. Lyra touched the edge of the map, running her fingers over the secret passageways marked in faded ink. Everything she had known was crumbling around her, and yet in its place something new, something undeniable was forming. Her gaze fell to a portrait resting on a lectern nearby. It was a depiction of the royal family painted when she had been but an infant. The king with his stern but kind eyes, Queen Ilara radiant with a soft beauty, and in her arms a child with dark curls and brilliant violet blue eyes. Lyra reached out hesitantly, her fingertips brushing the painting. It was like touching a ghost. So it is true, she whispered, voice barely audible. All of it. Evander watched her, his chest tightening. He could see the child she once was, the burden she now carried, the immense weight of destiny settling on her slender shoulders. He knew what it felt like to have the truth strip away everything you thought you were. As the candles burned lower, they continued to pour over the documents. Brother Cedric revealed coded letters, secret correspondences from nobles who had remained loyal to the House of Alaric. Even after its fall, a network of hope hidden beneath layers of fear and oppression, hope that now rested on Lyra's untried shoulders. At the first light of dawn, the courtyard of the monastery was bathed in a cold mist. Evander moved alone through the stones, practicing his sword forms. Each movement was crisp, controlled, honed over years of discipline. But his mind was elsewhere, wrestling with the revelations of the night before. From the shadow of a crumbling archway, Lyra watched him. She hugged her cloak tighter against the morning chill, feeling the gnawing doubt in her chest. I must seem so disappointing, she called out, finally breaking the silence. Evander stopped his practice, turning to face her. A princess who cannot even hold a fork properly, let alone a sword. His expression softened. I saw how you cared for your people in Westbrook, he said. How you listened to their troubles, eased their fears, taught them how to help themselves. That is what true leadership looks like. Lyra stepped hesitantly into the courtyard. I am not sure I am ready, she admitted. Evander sheathed his sword, walking toward her. You have already begun, he said. You are stronger than you know, Lysandra. She smiled a little at the name, letting it settle on her tongue. I suppose I should start getting used to it. He gave a slight bow, the corners of his mouth tilting up in a rare, almost smile. Princess Lysandra. For the first time, she did not flinch at the title. For the first time, she let it settle inside her like a seed, ready to take root. Later that day in the library, Brother Cedric introduced them to another figure. A man with a strong frame, weathered by time, but still sturdy. He wore a simple tunic, but his bearing spoke of a past filled with honor and duty. This is Roland, Cedric said proudly. He once served in the royal guard of your father. Roland knelt before Lyra, his head bowed. I am here to serve you, princess, he said with quiet reverence. Please rise, she said, quickly, flustered. I do not know if I deserve such loyalty. Roland stood, meeting her gaze with unwavering conviction. The blood of kings flows in your veins, he said. The kingdom has suffered under Vitorian-esque tyranny. We need hope again. We need you. Lyra's throat tightened. She had spent her entire life believing she was nothing special, just a healer in a forgotten village. Now here were men who had served the greatest king in Valoria as history, kneeling before her, placing their hopes in her hands. It was overwhelming, and yet it filled her with a fire she had never known before. Perhaps she thought the old life she had known had only been a preparation for this. That night in her modest room within the monastery walls, Lyra sat by a small window staring out at the stars. The sky stretched endless and black above her, dotted with pinpricks of light. She wondered if her parents had once gazed at the same stars, wondering about her future. A soft knock broke her reverie. Come in, she said. Evander stepped inside, carrying a rolled parchment sealed with red wax. It is from Lord Thorn, he said, handing it to her. Lyra broke the seal, her fingers trembling. The letter was brief but powerful. There were still nobles who remained loyal to the House of Alaric. They waited in secret, ready to rally behind the rightful heir. They waited for her. Lyra lowered the parchment, staring at it as if it might change into something less terrifying. They are expecting a leader, she said, her voice small. What if I am not what they hope for? What if I fail? Evander stepped closer, his voice low and steady. Then I will stand with you, he said. Always there was a moment between them, charged with something unspoken, something neither dared name. The tension crackled like dry leaves underfoot. Lyra looked up at him, searching his eyes. Why are you doing this? She asked. Why risk everything for me? Evander hesitated, struggling to find the right words, because he said finally, I have spent my life fighting for causes that meant nothing. Fighting because I was told to, not because I believed. He reached out his hand, stopping just short of touching her cheek. But you are something worth believing in. Lyra felt her heart stutter. She reached up, touching his hand lightly. Thank you, she whispered. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt less alone. Far below the monastery, hidden by the mist and darkness, figures moved in the night. The Dark Guard had not given up their hunt. Their captain watched the lights in the monastery with cold, calculating eyes. The princess thinks herself safe, he muttered, but she will learn the truth soon enough. He turned to his men, giving a sharp order. Prepare the assault. Tomorrow before the sun sets, the girl will be in chains, and all of Valoria will remain under our rule. Inside the monastery, oblivious to the approaching danger, Lyra finally allowed herself a moment of hope. She clutched the medallion at her neck, drawing strength from it. Tomorrow she would begin the journey toward reclaiming her birthright. Tomorrow she would take her first steps toward destiny, but would destiny be ready to accept her? Or would the shadows of betrayal and blood that haunted her past rise once more to claim her before she ever reached the throne? The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the rugged path winding toward the distant capital. Disguised in worn traders' cloaks, Evander, Lyra, and Roland moved at a steady pace, a battered cart creaking behind them. Dust rose with every step, settling on their travel-worn faces. Villages they passed were little more than skeletons of former lives, burned-out huts, fields stripped barren, children with hollow cheeks and eyes far older than their years. Lyra gripped the reins tighter, her heart aching at every sight. "How could this happen?" she murmured, her voice trembling as she watched a gaunt boy struggle to lift a bundle of firewood. Roland, his weathered face lined with sorrow, shook his head. "King Vitorian bleeds the land dry. Every harvest seized, every able-bodied man pressed into the army. The rest left to starve." Lyra halted the cart as they neared a dilapidated inn where a cluster of villagers huddled. She rummaged through their supplies and pulled out a loaf of bread, then climbed down. "Lyra," Evander warned under his breath. But she was already moving, her steps quick and purposeful. She knelt before a trembling child, offering the bread with a soft smile. The mother, her eyes wide with disbelief, clutched her child and whispered hoarsely, "Thank you, milady. Thank you." Lyra only nodded, brushing the child's tangled hair back with gentle fingers. Evander and Roland exchanged glances. Every gesture like this drew attention, and with a price on Evander's head and Lyra's life depending on anonymity, attention was the last thing they needed. As they rode away, Lyra kept her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I can't ignore them," she said finally, her voice steel beneath the sorrow. "If I turn away now, I don't deserve the crown." Evander said nothing, but inside, a fierce, protective pride grew, burning hotter with each step of their journey. That night they made camp beneath a crescent moon, its pale light glinting off Evander's sword as he practiced fluid arcs and stances, his mind restless. Roland, meanwhile, sat by the fire, regaling Lyra with tales of the old kingdom. "Your father," Roland began, his voice rough but steady. "He was a different sort of king, no pomp, no parade of gold and banners. He would ride through the villages alone, offering aid where it was needed, listening to the people's grievances." Lyra leaned forward, her eyes wide, the flames dancing in her gaze. "And my mother?" she asked softly. Roland smiled wistfully. "Queen Ilara. Sharp as a blade she was. Your father called her his fiercest general, though she wielded no sword. She built the royal hospital, trained healers, and insisted that the crown serve the people, not the other way around." Lyra pressed her fingers to the medallion at her throat, feeling its worn edges. Her connection to that legacy ran deeper than blood. "It explains," she whispered almost to herself, "why I always felt drawn to healing." Evander, standing silently nearby, watched her, admiration etched plainly across his features. The fire cracked, sending sparks spiraling into the night. For a moment, none of them spoke, each lost in thoughts of what was, and what could be again. 2 days later, they reached the bustling port city of Varendale, gateway to the capital. The air was thick with the scent of salt and tar, and the harbor bristled with masts like a forest of skeletal fingers. They weaved through the crowds, their hoods pulled low. Evander kept a hand on his sword, his body coiled tight with tension. Too many eyes, too many soldiers. At the wharf, a line of travelers waited for inspection before boarding the ferry that would carry them closer to the capital. Lyra's heart pounded as they joined the queue. A group of royal guards moved among the people, scrutinizing faces, checking documents. Then the captain of the guard held up a parchment, the ink still fresh. Evander's likeness stared back at them from the wanted poster. "We seek this traitor," the captain barked. "The Duke of Blackmore. Harbor him, and you will share his fate." Lyra barely had time to think. She stumbled forward, clutching her stomach, and let out a convincing moan of distress. Gasps rose from the crowd as she collapsed to the ground. The guards converged immediately. "Stand back," the captain ordered, pushing past onlookers. In the confusion, Evander and Roland seized the moment. Roland knocked over a barrel of fish, sending it rolling into the guard's path. Evander hoisted Lyra into his arms, murmuring reassurances as they disappeared into the maze of alleyways. Breathless, they found refuge in the ruins of an ancient temple at the city's edge. Moss and vines choked the crumbling stone, but the sanctuary was deserted, safe for now. Evander set Lyra down gently. "Quick thinking," he said, brushing a stray curl from her forehead. She managed a weak smile. "Learned from the best." For a moment, the world shrank to just the two of them. The warmth of his hand, the steady beat of his heart, where her palm rested against his chest. "This isn't the life you were meant for," Evander said, voice low. "And you were meant to serve a king, not flee from his soldiers," she replied. Their gazes locked, a storm of unspoken feelings swirling between them. Roland coughed pointedly from the entrance, breaking the moment. "There's another way to the capital," he said. "Longer, harder, but safer." Evander nodded grimly. "Then we take it." Before following Roland, Evander brushed Lyra's hand with his fingertips, a fleeting, tender gesture that lingered longer in her chest than any wound. Their detour took them through forgotten paths, winding deeper into the kingdom's wounded heart. They passed villages where children played in broken fountains, their laughter eerie against the backdrop of empty homes. Forests where the trees stood like mournful sentinels. Valleys where banners of the old regime still fluttered, torn and faded, in defiance. Each night, around the fire, Roland taught Lyra the history her stolen childhood had denied her. The lineages of noble houses, the ancient laws of governance, the customs of diplomacy. And Lyra proved a quick study, her mind sharp, her spirit unyielding. Evander watched it all in silence, every day more certain. She was no pretender. She was the rightful queen, forged by hardship into something stronger than any bloodline could promise. One evening, as they camped beneath the towering ruins of Castle Durnhold, Lyra sat apart from the others, cradling the medallion in her hands. Evander approached, the night wrapping them in a hush. "You doubt yourself," he said, not as a question. She turned to him, the firelight catching the wet sheen in her eyes. "They're waiting for a savior," she whispered. "What if I fail them? What if I'm not enough?" Evander crouched beside her, taking her hand in his. "You will not be alone," he said fiercely. "Not ever." A single tear traced down Lyra's cheek. She did not pull away when Evander reached up to brush it away. The kiss, when it came, was inevitable, a promise sealed in silence. Their lips met gently at first, then with a fierce, aching need born of fear, hope, and the certainty that their fates were now bound together. When they broke apart, neither spoke. Words would only diminish the gravity of what they had just exchanged. At dawn, they set out again, their path taking them closer to the heart of the kingdom and the peril that awaited there. Ahead lay the capital, where allies and enemies wore the same smiles, where secrets slithered behind every curtain, where the crown of the kingdom rested on a knife's edge, waiting for the hand brave enough to seize it. As the sun rose over the distant spires, Lyra, rightful heir to a shattered throne, straightened her shoulders and tightened her grip on the reins. The road ahead would demand everything she had, and more. But she would not falter, not with Evander at her side, not with the spirit of her father and mother burning in her veins, not with a kingdom's future hanging in the balance. Destiny was no longer a distant tide. It surged now in every beat of her heart, and she was ready to meet it. The first light of dawn broke over the walls of the capital as Lyra, Evander, and Roland approached the massive gates. Dressed as common travelers, they blended into the crowd of merchants, peasants, and laborers streaming into the city. The city loomed before them, a sprawling fortress of stone and shadow. Banners bearing the crest of King Victorian snapped in the cold morning breeze. Guards in black armor patrolled every street, their eyes cold and watchful. The scent of fear was as tangible as the dust in the air. Lyra pulled her hood lower over her face, her fingers trembling slightly. "It is so different from my memories," she whispered to Evander. "So much darker. Victorian rules through fear," Evander murmured back. "Here, everyone is a suspect." They entered the city with the others, their heads bowed. As they passed through a wide plaza, a grim scene unfolded before them. A man, His back, bloody and torn, was tied to a post, enduring lash after lash of a soldier's whip. His crime had been a whisper of rebellion. Lyra flinched with every crack of the whip, but she forced herself to keep walking. To stop, to show sympathy, would be to risk everything. They wound their way through narrow alleys, past crumbling statues of the old kings and queens, past markets that bustled with desperate life. Everywhere, portraits of Victorian loomed, stern, imposing, a constant reminder of who held the power now. At last, they reached the mansion of Lord Thorn, a sprawling estate nestled discreetly between the districts of trade and nobility. The grand facade was a mask. The real entrance lay hidden behind a crumbling wall in a side alley. A heavy door opened silently, and they were pulled inside. Lord Thorn stood before them, tall, with greying hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He was dressed in rich but unpretentious clothes, a man accustomed to power yet weary of its cost. He took Lyra's hand and kissed it reverently. "Princess Lysandra," he said, his voice low and filled with emotion, "I never lost hope that this day would come." "Lord Thorn," Lyra replied, inclining her head, "your willingness to help us will not be forgotten." Thorn's eyes shifted to Evander, a gleam of curiosity in their depths. "And you, Duke Evander," he said slowly, "to think the king's hound now the princess's shield. Fascinating." Evander's jaw tightened. "I prefer the title of truth-bearer," he said, his voice clipped. "Of course," Thorn said smoothly, a small smile playing at his lips. "Come, others are waiting." They were led through a maze of hidden passages into a large hall, lit by discreet torches and heavy with the scent of old stone and secrecy. A dozen figures turned as they entered, men and women of noble blood, their faces wary, hopeful, or skeptical. Lyra felt their stares pierce her cloak. She stood straighter, her heart hammering in her chest. Lady Eleanor, a tall woman with silver hair and regal bearing, stepped forward. "The eyes of Queen Elara," she murmured, studying Lyra intently, but others were not so easily convinced. Baron Gareth, a heavy-set man with shrewd eyes, crossed his arms. "And how are we to know this girl is truly who she claims to be?" he demanded. In answer, Lyra drew the medallion from beneath her cloak and held it up. The golden symbol of the House of Arvendor glinted in the torchlight, its intricate markings unmistakable. Thorn stepped forward and examined it carefully, then nodded. "The medallion is genuine," he said, "passed from Queen Elara herself to her daughter on the night of the coup." Murmurs swept the room, a mix of awe and skepticism giving way to belief. Thorn turned back to the gathering, his voice gaining strength. "But symbols alone are not enough. What we propose is dangerous. If we are to confront Victorian, we must present irrefutable evidence of his crimes. Proof of the massacre. Proof that the rightful heir lives." "We need the royal archives," Evander said. "Records from the night of the coup." "And we need the people," Lyra added, her voice steady. "I will not win this throne through blood and terror. I will not become another tyrant." Several heads nodded, others hesitated, but the seed of hope had been planted. Later that night, after the nobles had dispersed into the shadows, Lyra and Evander sat together in a small private chamber. Lyra stared into the fire, her thoughts a storm within her. "It feels as though they are shaping me into something I am not," she said quietly. "A banner, a weapon." Evander sat beside her, close enough to feel the heat of her body, close enough to hear the tremor in her voice. "They see a symbol, not a person," he said. "But I see you." She turned to him then, her hand finding his arm. "You are the only one who does." The distance between them closed like the inevitable pull of the tide. Their faces were inches apart, the fire casting flickering shadows across their features. But before their lips could meet, the door crashed open. Soldiers flooded into the room, their armor gleaming, swords drawn. "Traitors," one of them barked. "By order of King Victorian, you are under arrest." Evander's sword was in his hand in an instant, the blade singing through the air. "We have been betrayed," he snarled, standing protectively in front of Lyra. Chaos erupted. Roland burst into the room from another passage, sword swinging. Lord Thorn appeared as well, a dagger flashing in his hand. Lyra seized a heavy candlestick and swung it at a soldier who lunged at her, the impact sending him sprawling. Evander fought like a man possessed, cutting down their attackers with swift, brutal precision, but they were outnumbered, and more soldiers poured into the halls. "We have to get her out," Thorn shouted, parrying a blow. Evander grabbed Lyra's hand. "This way," he commanded. They raced through hidden corridors, Roland and Thorn covering their retreat. Alarms began to sound throughout the city. The betrayal was complete. There would be no safe refuge in the capital now. Bursting into the night, they found themselves in the narrow, winding streets of the slums. Dogs barked, startled by the commotion. Shouts rang out in the distance. Evander pulled Lyra close. "Stay with me," he said, his breath hot against her ear. They ran, their feet pounding against the cobblestones, the city closing in around them like a snare. In the darkness, they ducked through alleys and over rooftops, using every scrap of Evander's knowledge of the city to stay ahead of their pursuers. But soldiers were everywhere, and the walls themselves seemed to whisper betrayal. At last, breathless and bleeding, they found shelter in an abandoned tanner's shop, hidden beneath the stench of old leather and dye. Lyra slumped against the wall, her heart thundering. "What do we do now?" she gasped. Evander knelt before her, gripping her shoulders. "We survive," he said. "We find the proof we need. We rally the people." His eyes burned with conviction. "And we take back your kingdom." Outside, the city roared with the fury of the hunt. But somewhere deep in the night, beyond the fear, beyond the pain, a flame of hope flickered and grew. It would take everything they had. It would test them beyond anything they had ever known. But the dawn would come, and with it, a queen would rise. Will Lyra and Evander manage to find the evidence they need before the King's forces hunt them down? The night exploded into chaos as the soldiers surged into Lord Thorn's mansion. Steel clashed against steel, shouts echoed through the halls, and the sharp scent of blood and smoke filled the air. Evander stood at the center of the storm, his blade a silver blur as he fought to keep Lyra safe. He moved with a grace and ferocity that left even the hardened soldiers hesitating, their confidence wavering under his assault. "Go with Roland," Evander commanded between parries. "He knows the way out." "Not without you," Lyra cried, her heart pounding in terror. Evander caught her gaze, and for a fleeting moment, everything else faded away. "You are the hope of the kingdom. You must survive. Go." Tears stung Lyra's eyes, but she obeyed, knowing that to stay would be to risk everything. With Roland pulling her along, they raced through a hidden door behind a tapestry, disappearing into the warren of secret tunnels beneath the mansion. Evander turned back to the fight, his sword heavy but unyielding. For every soldier he felled, two more took their place. A blade found its mark along his side, and pain flared hot and sharp, but he fought on, driven by a force greater than himself. At last, battered and bleeding, he broke free into the night, slipping into the shadows as the mansion behind him was swallowed by fire and ruin. Dawn crept across the sky as Lyra and Roland stumbled into a forgotten chamber deep beneath the city streets. The air was damp and heavy with the scent of mildew, the stone walls cold to the touch. Evander collapsed against the wall, his breath ragged. Blood stained his cloak, and his face was pale beneath the grime. Lyra knelt beside him immediately, tearing open his tunic to reveal the wound. She worked quickly, applying herbs from a pouch at her waist, her hands steady, even as fear gnawed at her heart. "Who betrayed us?" she asked quietly, her voice tight. Roland stood at the entrance, sword drawn, his eyes scanning the darkness. "There are many who stand to gain by keeping Victorian on the throne," he said grimly. "Money, power, fear. Take your pick." Evander watched Lyra, his vision swimming. Her touch was gentle, her expression fierce with concentration. "Why do you risk your life for me?" he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "I am the man who came to kill you." Lyra looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "And you became the man who gave me back my identity." She leaned closer, her lips brushing against his forehead, a touch so light it was barely there. "Rest now," she murmured. "We need you strong." Evander closed his eyes, surrendering to the darkness, trusting her to keep him safe. Hours later, as the city stirred to life above them, a figure emerged from the shadows of the tunnels. Lord Thorn, his usually impeccable appearance disheveled, moved with urgency. His face was grave as he knelt beside them. "The betrayal came from within," he said without preamble. "Lady Eleanor was captured. She confessed under torture." Evander stirred, forcing himself upright despite the pain. "We need new allies," he said, his voice hoarse but determined. Thorn nodded. "We have them. The people." Lyra frowned. "That is too soon. We are not ready." "Hope does not wait for permission," Thorn said grimly. "Word of your return has spread. The streets whisper your name. And Councillor Magnus made a grave mistake last night. He raised the taxes again. The city teeters on the edge of rebellion." Lyra's heart twisted. She had wanted to be careful, to move slowly, to rebuild the kingdom without more bloodshed. But the tide was rising beyond their control. "We have to act," Roland said, "before Victorian crushes this spark." Evander reached for Lyra's hand, his grip weak but steady. "Whatever comes, we face it together." Lyra squeezed his hand in return, drawing strength from the bond between them. In the heart of the royal palace, Councillor Magnus paced before the grand fireplace, the flames casting monstrous shadows along the gilded walls. "The rumors spread like plague," Magnus said, his voice clipped with tension. "The people speak of the lost princess returned. They say she carries the Medallion of Arvandor." King Victorian, seated in his throne-like chair, slammed his fist onto the armrest. "You swore she was dead," he roared. "You swore." Magnus's expression was calm, calculated. "Perhaps we can use this to our advantage. Let her show herself. Let the traitors rally to her banner. Then we strike, wipe them out in one clean sweep." Victorian's eyes narrowed, a dangerous gleam sparking within them. "And Evander." Magnus allowed himself a small, cruel smile. "Your loyal executioner has become our greatest enemy. But every man has a weakness. We will find his, and when we do, he will fall." He turned to the window, looking down over the restless streets below, where crowds gathered in uneasy murmurs. "Let the girl run," he said softly. "Let her believe she can win. Hope is a powerful weapon. But despair is stronger still." That night, deep beneath the city, Lyra sat alone, staring into the darkness. Her thoughts raced, 1,000 fears pulling at her. Evander stirred behind her, waking from a fevered sleep. "You should rest," she said without turning. "I cannot," he answered, struggling to sit up. "Not when you carry the weight of a kingdom alone." Lyra turned to him, her heart breaking at the sight of his pain, his stubborn will refusing to bend. "You are not alone," he said, his voice low and fierce. "Not while I breathe." She moved to him, taking his hand in hers. "I fear what is coming," she whispered. "I fear becoming something I am not." "You are stronger than you know," Evander said. "Stronger than fear, stronger than doubt. You are the flame they cannot extinguish." Their eyes locked, a silent vow passing between them. Together. Always. In the markets and taverns of the city, the name Lysandra spread like wildfire. Songs whispered of a queen lost and found. Murals appeared overnight, crude paintings of a young woman with a golden medallion held high. Hope blossomed in the hearts of the people, and with hope came danger. Soldiers cracked down harder, searching every home, every cellar, every alley. Informants prowled, selling secrets for coin. Yet still, the whispers grew louder. Still, the people dared to dream. At a secret gathering beneath a ruined chapel, Lyra met with representatives of the city's guilds, merchants, and common folk. They knelt before her, pledging their loyalty, offering what little they had: food, shelter, arms. It was not an army, but it was a beginning. "We stand with you," they said, "for Arvandor, for justice." Lyra accepted their vows with a heart heavy with gratitude and fear. She would not fail them. She could not. Above it all, in his marble palace, Victorian watched the city seethe. "Soon," he whispered to himself, "soon the snake will show its head, and I will crush it beneath my boot." His eyes gleamed with madness. "Prepare the blackguard," he ordered Magnus. "No prisoners." Magnus bowed low, a serpent's smile curling his lips. "As you command, my king." In the deepest hour of the night, Lyra and Evander stood on a rooftop overlooking the city. Torches flared below as soldiers marched through the streets, their armor clanking like a grim drumbeat. "We do not have much time," Evander said. No, Lyra agreed. But we have something they will never understand. Evander looked at her, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Hope. Hope, Lyra echoed, her voice fierce. As the first cries of rebellion rose from the city below, they knew the battle had truly begun, and they would face it side by side. But when the time comes, will Lyra be able to make the ultimate sacrifice to save the kingdom? The bells of the great temple rang out across the city, their deep tones echoing through the morning mist. The day of royal celebration had arrived, a day carefully orchestrated by King Victorian to reinforce his grip over Valoria. Banners fluttered from every rooftop, soldiers lined the streets, and the heavy presence of the royal guard kept the restless populace in check. Inside the temple, golden light streamed through towering stained glass windows, illuminating the grand hall where nobles and commoners alike had gathered. Statues of ancient kings watched silently from the alcoves, their stone faces bearing witness to the charade unfolding below. Victorian stood proudly at the altar, dressed in resplendent robes, a crown gleaming atop his head. Beside him stood Magnus, his most trusted advisor, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd. Sources say they plan to expose you today, Magnus whispered to Victorian, his voice barely audible over the murmured prayers and songs. Let them try, Victorian replied with a smirk. They will find that hope is a poor shield against steel. Outside on the rooftops surrounding the temple, Evander knelt behind a crumbling parapet, a bow in his hands and his eyes fixed on the gathering below. His injuries had healed enough for him to move with lethal precision, though the scars still throbbed with each heartbeat. Beside him, Lyra adjusted her disguise, a simple cloak that hid her face, but not the fire in her eyes. We can still turn back, Evander said, his voice low but steady. Find more allies, strike when the odds are better. Lyra shook her head, resolute. The time for fear is over. The people need to see the truth today. If we wait any longer, it will be too late. Their eyes met, a silent exchange of everything they dared not say aloud. If something happens to me, Lyra began, her voice catching. Nothing will happen to you, Evander interrupted fiercely. I will be at your side until the end. Without hesitation, he leaned in and kissed her. It was brief, desperate, filled with the weight of everything they faced and everything they risked losing. Until the end, she whispered as they pulled apart. Inside the temple, Victorian raised his arms, calling for silence. His voice, rich and commanding, filled the space. Today we celebrate peace and prosperity under the great rule of Valoria, a kingdom stronger than ever before, a kingdom united. The crowd listened in heavy silence, some faces admiring, others dark with suspicion. From the back of the hall, Lyra and Lord Thorn moved forward. Their steps were slow but determined, cutting through the tension like a blade. When Victorian spoke again, it was with the false warmth of a practiced deceiver. We stand together, he declared, as one people, as one voice. A single voice rose above the murmurs. Built on lies, that voice said, clear and unwavering. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Lyra stepped into the light, her hood falling away to reveal her face. Victorian froze, his smile twisting into a snarl. Who dares interrupt the sacred rites? Lyra lifted the medallion high for all to see, the golden emblem of Arvandor catching the light like a star. I am Lysandra, daughter of King Alaric and Queen Ilara, the rightful heir to the throne of Valoria. A stunned silence fell over the temple. All eyes turned to Victorian, whose face darkened with rage. Impossible, Magnus cried, stepping forward. The royal family perished in the rebellion. Say massacre, Lyra said, her voice cutting through the air like a whip. Say it and call it by its true name. Thorn began distributing copies of ancient documents to the gathered nobility, records of the coup, testimonies from those who had witnessed the night the palace burned. Brother Cedric stepped forward as well, bearing scrolls sealed with the royal mark. Proof, Thorn said loudly, that Victorian and Magnus orchestrated the fall of the true royal family. Chaos erupted. Some nobles gasped and whispered among themselves. Some guards shifted uneasily, their loyalty torn. The crowd murmured louder, the beginnings of outrage swelling. Vitorian stepped forward, drawing a sword from beneath his robes, the blade flashing wickedly. "Traitors," he spat. "All of you. You dare challenge the will of the true king?" From the side of the hall, Evander burst into the temple, sword in hand, his presence like a thunderclap. "For 15 years I served you," Evander shouted, his voice shaking with anger. "I believed I was protecting Valoria." All the while the true traitor sat on the throne. Vitorian sneered. "Poor Evander, so much like your father, so eager to serve, so easy to deceive." Evander's face hardened, the old wound of his father's death burning anew. "My father died protecting the royal family." "Your father died a fool," Vitorian snarled, "and you will join him soon enough." With a roar, Vitorian lunged at Lyra, sword raised. Evander moved faster than thought, intercepting the blow with a clash of steel that rang through the temple. The duel was fierce and brutal. Evander fought with every ounce of strength he had, driving Vitorian back step by step. Meanwhile, Magnus shouted orders to the guards. "Eliminate the impostor," he cried. 1,000 gold coins for her head." The guards hesitated. Some moved toward Lyra, but others faltered, torn between fear and the growing realization that they had been serving a lie. The crowd erupted into shouts. "Protect the princess," someone yelled. "Down with the usurper," another voice cried. The tide was turning. Lyra stood tall, unafraid, the medallion still shining in her hand. She met the eyes of the soldiers approaching her, and one by one they lowered their weapons. Evander and Vitorian fought like titans, their swords clashing again and again. Blood stained the stones beneath their feet. "You could have ruled at my side," Vitorian snarled, locking blades with Evander. "I would rather die with honor than live in your shadow," Evander hissed back. With a final desperate surge of strength, Evander drove Vitorian back, knocking the sword from his hand. Vitorian stumbled, his chest heaving. "This is not over," he spat. But even as he spoke, the people surged forward, their anger and hope boiling over into action. Guards loyal to Lyra moved to arrest Vitorian. Nobles who had once cowered now stepped forward, emboldened by the sight of the true heir standing unbroken. Magnus slipped away in the chaos, his eyes cold and calculating. He would not go down with the sinking ship. Lyra approached Vitorian, her chin lifted high. "Your reign of terror is over," she said. Vitorian sneered. "You are a child playing at queenship. You have no idea what awaits you." "Perhaps not," Lyra said, "but I will face it with honor, and I will rebuild what you sought to destroy." With that, she turned away, leaving the usurper to his fate. As the dust settled, the bells of the temple rang out again, but this time they sang of freedom, of hope reborn. Lyra stood on the steps of the temple, Evander at her side as the people of Valoria knelt before her. A queen risen from the ashes of betrayal, a kingdom ready to heal. But even in that moment of triumph, shadows lingered. Magnus was still at large, and the true battle for Valoria's soul was only just beginning. Will Lyra be able to unite a kingdom still scarred by betrayal before Magnus unleashes his final deadly plan? The clash of steel rang out one final time across the vast halls of the great temple. Evander and Vitorian circled each other, breathless, their swords flashing under the sacred stained glass. Around them, chaos erupted as guards loyal to Lyra fought to maintain order, while citizens emboldened by hope and fury surged into the temple. Vitorian lunged with a savage roar, his blade striking sparks as Evander parried. Their duel was no longer just a contest of skill, but a battle of ideals, of past sins and future hopes colliding in every furious strike. "You were always just a pawn," Vitorian spat, driving Evander back. "I let you climb the ranks, I fed you lies, I made you my hound. You were nothing more than my tool to find her." Evander gritted his teeth, feeling the weight of those words, but he channeled his anger into focus. He remembered Lyra's face, the fierce determination in her eyes, the dreams of a kingdom reborn. "The game is over," Evander said coldly. With a deft movement, he disarmed Vitorian, sending the usurper's sword clattering across the marble floor. Vitorian stumbled, falling to his knees, his robes torn and bloodied. "Finish it," Vitorian sneered. "Do it. End me as I would have ended you." Evander stood over him, the tip of his sword hovering inches from Vitorian's throat. The crowd held its breath, the tension suffocating. "No," Evander said, lowering his weapon. "This kingdom's new era will begin with justice, not vengeance." A murmur of approval rippled through the temple. At the entrance, Magnus attempted to slip away in the confusion. But Roland, ever watchful, intercepted him with a well-placed blow to the back of the knees, sending the traitorous advisor sprawling. "Not so fast, old snake," Roland said, binding Magnus's hands roughly. Moments later, Lyra stepped out onto the grand balcony of the temple, the sun breaking through the clouds in golden shafts. Evander stood at her side, his sword sheathed, his wounds ignored. The square before them teemed with people, a living sea of faces upturned toward their queen. "People of Valoria," Lyra began, her voice ringing clear over the square, "the truth has finally come to light. I do not stand before you seeking a crown by blood alone, but seeking to restore what was stolen from all of us. Justice, compassion, hope." The crowd erupted into cheers, the sound like a rolling wave crashing against the walls. Vitorian and Magnus, bruised and shackled, were paraded through the crowd. Their fall from power was complete, but Lyra's triumph was tempered by the enormity of the task ahead. Rebuilding a broken kingdom would not be done in a day, but it would be done together. 1 week later, the great hall of the palace was filled with light and life for the first time in years. Nobles, commoners, and representatives from across Valoria gathered for the coronation. Lyra stood at the center, dressed in a simple gown that paid homage to her roots as a healer and a leader of the people. She wore no heavy jewels, no ostentatious displays of power, only the medallion of her family and a quiet, radiant strength. Brother Cedric, his hands steady despite his age, placed the royal crown upon her head. "I crown you, Lysandra, Queen of Valoria, first of your name," he declared. A roar of applause shook the very foundations of the hall. Lysandra turned to face the assembly, her voice steady. "This kingdom was built by the hands of its people, and by their hands it will endure. No longer will power be wielded for the few at the expense of the many. Justice, compassion, and honor shall be the pillars of our reign." Another wave of applause answered her, and from the crowd Evander stepped forward at her gesture. She looked at him with a warmth that reached beyond the formalities of the moment. "Duke Evander of Blackmoor," she said, "by your courage in the face of lies, by your loyalty to the true kingdom, I name you Lord Protector of the Crown and my personal advisor." Evander knelt before her, head bowed. "My life at your service, Your Majesty." Their eyes met briefly, a connection deeper than any words. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Lysandra and Evander strolled through the royal gardens. The flowers were wild and unkempt, but beautiful, a symbol of the natural strength of their kingdom. "Lord Protector," she said with a teasing smile, a rather formal title for someone who once thought me a simple herbalist. Evander chuckled, a rare sound that lit up his face. "There was never anything simple about you," he said. Lysandra grew serious, her gaze turning toward the horizon. "It will take years to heal the wounds of this land. So many scars, so much mistrust. You will not face it alone," Evander said, taking her hand gently. She squeezed his fingers. "When you found me, you came to take my life," she said softly. "And I found my purpose instead," he replied. At that, Lysandra smiled through the threat of tears and leaned into him. They kissed under the setting sun, the medallion glinting against her chest like a star reborn. A promise was sealed in that kiss, of love, of loyalty, of a future worth fighting for. In the cold depths of the palace dungeon, Magnus sat shackled in a dark cell. The air was damp and foul, the stone walls closing in like a tomb. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. A figure approached, cloaked and hooded, face hidden. Magnus smiled, a slow, serpentine grin. "Took you long enough," he said. The visitor crouched before the bars. "The plans have changed, but they are not destroyed," the figure said in a voice like silk over steel. Magnus leaned forward eagerly. "She thinks she has won. Let her believe it," the visitor replied. "For now." From the shadows, other cloaked figures emerged, silent as phantoms. Magnus chuckled low in his throat. "The game has only just begun," he whispered. The torches flickered as if in warning, casting long, ominous shadows against the stone. As Queen Lysandra celebrated the dawn of a new era, darker forces stirred in secret, plotting the next chapter of Valoria's story. Because where there is light, there will always be those who seek to extinguish it. Will Lysandra and Evander be strong enough to defend their kingdom against the darkness rising from the shadows? The winds of Valoria carried change across the land. Markets bustled with new life. Streets once silenced by fear now echoed with laughter and songs. Fields abandoned during the years of tyranny blossomed again, and the old wounds of the kingdom began to heal under the steady hand of Queen Lysandra. In the throne room, where treachery once plotted in whispers, children now ran and played while nobles met openly to shape a future built on trust and unity. The scars of the past were not forgotten, but they were honored, turned into lessons that strengthened rather than divided. Evander stood always near Lysandra, his gaze vigilant yet softer now, tempered by hope. They faced challenges still, for the task of rebuilding a kingdom was never simple, and shadows still lingered beyond the borders. But together, with the strength of the people and the wisdom born of suffering, they forged a new destiny. A kingdom restored not just by bloodlines, but by the courage to believe in something greater than power. And as the sun set over Valoria, its golden rays bathing the castle walls, a single truth rang clearer than any coronation bell. This was just the beginning. If you loved this story and want to dive into even more epic journeys, make sure to hit the subscribe button so you never miss an adventure. Your support keeps this channel alive and growing, bringing more tales like this straight to you. If this story touched your heart, leave a like to show your support. It means the world to us and helps the story reach even more dreamers and adventurers. Know someone who would be inspired by Lysandra's courage and Evander's loyalty? Share this video with your friends and family and let them join our growing community. And don't forget to save this video to your favorites playlist, so whenever you need a reminder that hope always rises, you can return to this epic tale. Thank you for being part of this journey. See you in the next adventure.